Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we've been handed, well, a truly daunting task. We're going to peer back into the crucible of human existence, a time of sheer planetary upheaval, a time utterly dominated by ice. We're talking about the Ice Age, but not the simple snow globe vision most people probably have in their heads.
And that's really the first thing we have to dismantle, that simplistic view. We're discussing the Pleistocene epoch, which is just this immense geologic timescale.
Yeah.
It spans over 2.5 million years, and it's characterized by massive continuous change.
Right.
But for our purposes, for human history, the real defining challenge, the period that was the ultimate evolutionary filter, was the last glacial maximum, the LGM.
The LGM, so that's around, 20,000 years ago? That's when the freezing really peaked. Why is it so crucial to focus on that specific moment rather than the whole 2.5 million years?
Because that period, it represented the absolute apex of environmental stress. The Ice Age was never one long, continuous deep freeze.
It wasn't.
No, it was a cycle, a series of long, severe cold periods. We call them glacials. And they were punctuated by warmer, often quite brief, interludes, the interglacials. The LGM was when those ice sheets reached their maximum extent, and that created the most intense, relentless survival requirements of the entire epoch.
So it wasn't just cold. The LGM was the ultimate test. It's what separated the species that had the right technology, the right social organization, from those that just couldn't adapt.
Exactly.
And we're talking about early Homo sapiens and, of course, their neighbors, the Neanderthals, both enduring this unimaginable pressure.
We are. And the groups that survived this sustained, unpredictable severity were forced to innovate profoundly. Every single aspect of their existence, from tools and diet to their social structures, it all had to undergo this rapid, radical transformation.
It's a remarkable story of forced evolution, really, intellectually and culturally.
That's a perfect way to put it.
I mean, just imagine waking up every morning knowing that your survival depended on mastering bone-chilling cold, hunting an animal 10 times your size, and finding food in a landscape that was, frankly, trying to kill you. Our mission today is to unpack all of it, the strategies, the innovations, and the cognitive shifts that allowed our ancestors to not just endure, but to actually thrive during Earth's most challenging era. Okay, so let's unpack this. How did these small, highly mobile groups manage daily life when glaciers stretched for miles and survival was a constant daily engineering challenge?
To really appreciate the magnitude of what they achieved, we need to understand the fundamental changes to the planet itself. The Ice Age wasn't just a drop in temperature. It was a massive physical reshaping of the world's geography.
And the evidence we have paints such a dramatic picture of that glacial expansion. We often forget the scale of it. Ice sheets covering much of Europe, North America, vast stretches of northern Asia, and they were sometimes kilometers thick. It's a world that's fundamentally unrecognizable from our own.
And the key physical consequence of trapping all that water and ice was a radical plunge in global sea level.
How much of a drop are we talking about?
In some places, by 120 meters or even more. And this exposed massive stretches of continental shelf. Critically, it created these vast land bridges that connected continents that had previously been separated by water.
The Bering Land Bridge, right? Beringia. That's the classic example your source material brings up. This massive exposed plain that connected Siberia and North America. It wasn't just a geographical oddity. It was a major migration highway.
Precisely. And Beringia wasn't exposed ice. It was a massive, relatively dry steppe tundra. It facilitated the movement of not only the first people into the Americas, but before them, the massive herds of megafauna they absolutely depended on.
So for early humans, these land bridges meant entirely new territories to explore, new resource bases to tap into. It was literally the pathway to colonizing whole new continents. And while the northern regions were defined by ice, the climate shifts were global. It's easy to overlook that. The Ice Age wasn't just a northern hemisphere freeze. The rest of the world felt these profound effects.
Absolutely. In the north, the landscape was a cold, barren tundra dominated by permafrost, where very few plants could get a foothold. And this put enormous pressure on the base of the food chain.
Okay.
But even the equatorial regions felt the crunch. They didn't have glaciers, obviously, but they experienced severe, unpredictable changes in precipitation that led to immense aridity.
So places that are lush today, maybe parts of the Middle East or North Africa, they would have become vast deserts, water sources drying up, ecosystems just completely disrupted. So whether you're dealing with freezing cold or intense drought, the common denominator was instability.
And that instability led directly to food chain pressure. When vegetation drastically reduced or shifted, whether because of ice or drought, the plant-dependent animals suffered. And if your primary resource animals suffer, the pressure on the human hunter-gatherers who were entirely reliant on those resources becomes immense. Survival then hinges on specializing in whatever reliable resource remains.
Which brings us to the megafauna. These animals weren't just big, they were essential. They had successfully adapted to the extreme cold, armed with dense insulating fur and massive layers of fat. They were, well, walking, breathing resource packages.
And what's fascinating here is how early humans turned this incredible, dangerous challenge, hunting a 6-ton mammoth, into their primary life-sustaining resource.
Yeah.
Unlike gathering, which might offer variable low-calorie returns, a single successful mammoth hunt was an energy jackpot.
And that windfall wasn't just the meat. We have to think about this holistically. The carcass provided thousands of pounds of high-calorie protein and fat, which was critical for fueling the human brain. But beyond the plate, you have the hides for thick, insulating materials for clothing and shelter. The massive bones and tusks became raw material for tools, even for sophisticated construction.
A single successful kill could sustain a group for months. It entirely justified the immense danger involved. It transformed a desperate gamble into, really, a form of strategic resource management.
Okay, so this extreme environment of the LGM, it demanded these technological leaps. But if you look at the entire suite of Paleolithic innovations, none is arguably more important than the complete mastery of fire. It just fundamentally reset the relationship between humanity and the natural world.
It wasn't just a discovery either. It was a progression toward engineering control. Initially, humans relied on opportunistic fire, maybe scavenging from lightning strikes or volcanoes.
Right, just finding it.
Then came the tremendous cognitive and physical effort required to maintain fire-carrying smoldering embers over vast distances, through rain and snow, ensuring that vital spark never, ever died.
And then the final step, the true breakthrough, generating fire on demand. This wasn't trivial. It required a deep understanding of friction, specific knowledge about selecting the driest kindling, the right fuel, how to stack the wood for a reliable, controlled flame.
And that knowledge, passed down meticulously through oral tradition, was a critical survival technology in itself.
Once they mastered it, the functions of fire went so far beyond just warmth. The warmth, of course, was critical for preventing frostbite and death in regions where temperatures plunged far below freezing.
Oh, absolutely. Fire allowed humans to move into and permanently colonize previously uninhabitable high-latitude regions.
But let's talk about the biological impact, the caloric impact. The ability to cook meat and tough fibrous plants, that was a massive evolutionary accelerator.
It was. Cooking fundamentally breaks down connective tissue and cell walls. This made food far easier and quicker to digest, allowing early humans to extract the maximum possible calories and nutrients from whatever food they did manage to secure.
Which is vital, right, because the human gut is metabolically expensive.
Very. By externalizing part of the digestion process, by cooking the food, they saved enormous amounts of energy that could be diverted to other processes, fueling the brain. And on top of that, cooking acted as a kind of rudimentary food safety, killing harmful bacteria and parasites that would have been prevalent in these large shared meat stores.
And the protective aspect must have been a game changer for just their stress levels.
Yeah.
The Ice Age was rife with massive predators. We're talking cave bears, those terrifying saber-toothed cats. A fire at night created an invisible, illuminated boundary. The light, the smoke, it all signaled danger to predators, allowing people to rest securely. That security is a massive psychological benefit.
And crucially, fire was a social engine. It became the stable center of community life, a place of shared light and comfort during the long, dark, brutal winters. It extended the useful day, allowing for tasks like tool preparation or clothing repair to continue after sunset. This concentrated, focused time around the hearth likely drove the accelerated development of complex language and social bonding. They had time to talk, to plan, to transmit complex knowledge.
We also can't forget its role in tool enhancement. Fire helped to harden the tips of wooden spears, making them more durable and able to penetrate tougher hides. Before specialized stone points became common, the synergy was endless.
And that necessity for durable, effective weapons led to a revolution in technology, the specialization of tools. The difficulty of the environment and the sheer size of the prey forced early humans to abandon the basic multi-purpose hand axes of previous eras.
Right, so we start to see the emergence of these highly sophisticated stone techniques, particularly the Woolly Mammoth method. This is where we need to get into the detail, because this method represents a massive intellectual leap. It wasn't just chipping a rock until it looked sharp.
No, not at all. It was a precise, multi-step process. First, the stone core had to be very carefully prepared and shaped, sometimes resembling a tortoise shell. Then the napper would strike a specific point on that prepared core, which allowed them to detach a single, predetermined, standardized flake.
So they were essentially pre-visualizing the final product before they even struck the stone. That's abstract thinking at a very high level.
It is. It's the cognitive precursor to manufacturing. Instead of just relying on opportunistic chipping, they were producing standardized components, predictable, large, flat, usable flakes, perfect for specialized tasks like cutting, scraping, or hafting onto shafts.
Which meant less waste and more reliable tools, which is critical in an environment where the right kind of stone might be hard to find.
But wood was often scarce in the tundra, and that forced a shift to bone and antler. These materials, which were abundant from megafauna kills, became central. They allowed for a degree of precision and intricacy that stone often couldn't match.
And the quintessential example of this has to be the bone needle. It's such a small, simple object, yet it was absolutely indispensable for survival in that environment.
It was.
Tell us why a needle is so important.
Because without it, you die of exposure. It's that simple. Needles, crafted from sharpened bone and featuring an eye for sinew thread, allowed early humans to stitch hides together precisely. This enabled the creation of layered, snug-fitting clothing trousers, hooded tunics, mittens, boots.
Loose hides provide warmth, but they don't trap it efficiently.
Exactly. Form-fitting layered garments created air pockets, which are crucial for insulation. They offered a superior defense against the sustained, intense cold and wind. It is literally the difference between surviving a blizzard and freezing to death.
And when you're confronting a giant woolly mammoth, you need more than warmth. You need distance and you need power. This leads us to the atlatl, or the spear thrower. It answers that crucial strategic question. How do you hunt a 6-ton animal without immediately sacrificing yourself?
The atlatl was the perfect solution. It's essentially a lever shaft with a hook or a socket at the end that engages the butt of a spear or a dart. The hunter holds the atlatl and snaps their wrist in a throwing motion.
What's the physics behind that? How does it work?
It dramatically increases the mechanical advantage. It effectively extends the length of the hunter's throwing arm, and that results in a phenomenal transfer of kinetic energy. It creates a kind of whiplash effect, propelling the spear with far greater velocity and momentum than a hand throw could ever achieve.
So it dramatically increased the lethal range and, crucially, the penetrating power needed to get through the thick hide and fat of megafauna.
Yes. It transformed hunting from a close-quarters ambush, a desperate, high-risk maneuver, into a safer, more effective standoff engagement. That changes the entire risk-reward calculation for hunting.
Completely.
And as humanity spread, we see even more specialization. In areas with water resources, we see the development of the harpoon for aquatic hunting fish, seals, sometimes even whales. These were cleverly designed, often with barbed points made of bone or antler to ensure the prey was secured and didn't escape once it was struck.
Then there's something called the burin, which sounds like an engraving tool but was apparently key to functional design.
The burin is a small, chisel-like tool, often made with a sharp, diagonal cutting edge. It was used for fine carving and engraving of materials like bone, antler, and ivory. It allowed for the creation of intricate components. We think they were used for creating precise grooves in spear points, maybe improving their aerodynamic properties, and for manufacturing the intricate fittings required to build the most advanced weapons.
And that brings us to composite tools. This required immense cognitive sophistication, didn't it? It means taking totally different materials and combining them. A sharp stone or bone point, a flexible wooden shaft, and some kind of binding material like animal sinew or resin to create a superior functional weapon.
Yes. Composite tool construction represents a profound intellectual step forward. It requires planning, abstract thinking about the different properties of materials, flexibility, hardness, sharpness, and meticulous engineering. You have to understand that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It shows foresight and an understanding of material science centuries before the concept was ever formalized.
And these incredible tools, they were all designed for one purpose: securing the vast resource base provided by those migrating herds. The necessity of following that food supply dictated the entire lifestyle of Ice Age groups. It was a life on the move.
That nomadic existence was just non-negotiable in the northern regions. Survival revolved around anticipating the seasonal movements of animals like mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and reindeer. They migrated religiously, moving north to the summer grazing lands and then retreating southward or toward temperate zones in the winter when the northern plains froze solid.
This required a staggering level of skill. I mean, they weren't just simple trackers. They had to be environmental psychologists.
They absolutely needed predictive knowledge that spanned generations. They required keen observational abilities to read the environment, recognizing subtle signs like disturbed vegetation, scat, footprints, or even shifts in bird migratory patterns. More critically, they needed to recall and predict the animals' routes years in advance, planning to intercept the herds at strategic bottlenecks or crossing points. This would maximize their hunting success while conserving precious energy.
And just think about the physical demand this placed on every single member of the group. This was a life of extreme physical endurance. They were constantly navigating incredibly treacherous terrain, frozen, uneven ground, icy rivers, mountains, all while carrying essential supplies, their children, and their freshly processed kills.
This is why the existence of specialized equipment is so strongly inferred. Moving efficiently and keeping pace with a vast herd across snow and ice would have been nearly impossible without some form of aid. It suggests the early adoption of snowshoes or maybe rudimentary sleds devices that minimized energy expenditure and prevented crippling injuries.
And the combination of all this planning was the hunt itself. We're not talking about one person stalking a deer here. Hunting megafauna required these highly coordinated, massive efforts. It required teamwork, trust, and advanced detailed planning that involved the entire group.
The tactics were often brilliant. Instead of relying on brute strength, which was suicide against a mammoth, groups utilized the environment as their weapon. They cooperated to drive herds into pre-identified natural traps, steep cliffs, deep ravines, or confined marshy areas where the animal's mobility was severely restricted.
Do they use fire in hunting as well?
Yes, often. Fire and smoke could be used as sophisticated herding tools, creating a psychological barrier or a noise-filled distraction to funnel the animals precisely toward the desired killing ground.
And the archaeological evidence for this is compelling, right? With sites showing evidence of mass kills, we're talking about dozens, sometimes hundreds, of animals killed all at once. This proves that high level of coordination.
It also demonstrates incredible foresight. A mass kill provided an enormous, sudden stockpile of resources, but it also required immense coordination to butcher, process, and store the kill before it spoiled or was scavenged. This suggests a division of labor and a communal agreement on how to distribute the resources, which speaks to a very advanced social structure.
And as we discussed earlier, the guiding philosophy was absolute holistic resource use. We connect this to the bigger picture. This holistic approach ensured every single element of the hard-won kill was utilized. The meat and organs were food.
The bones became structural supports and tools. The hides were clothing and shelter. Even the intestines could be cleaned and used as containers. Nothing was wasted, because waste meant death in that environment.
And that holistic approach led directly to one of the most remarkable engineering feats of the Ice Age: shelter. Protection from the elements wasn't a convenience. It was a daily, minute-by-minute survival mechanism.
Where they were available, caves were the jackpot. They offered stable temperatures, protection from wind and moisture, excellent heat retention, and were often situated near necessary resources like water. Caves weren't just shelters, they became centers of cultural life.
But caves were geographically limited. So in the vast, treeless tundra, the true heart of these nomadic hunting grounds, early humans had to engineer their own solution. And this gave rise to the ingenious mammoth bone hut.
Right.
Describe the engineering of these structures for us. They sound incredibly robust.
They were surprisingly complex. They used the largest, most durable bones, mammoth skulls, femurs, and sometimes interlocking mandibles, as foundations and structural supports. Tusks were often used as decorative or functional entrance arches. These massive frames were then covered by a dense layering of hides, sometimes coated with ash or soil, to create a windproof and insulated barrier.
The engineering knowledge required to manage the thermal mass, the wind load, and to construct such durable, semi-permanent structures in a frozen environment is just remarkable.
It shows an advanced understanding of environmental engineering. Combined with a central hearth, these structures could maintain survivable temperatures even when it was deadly cold outside. They weren't just temporary tents, they were engineered homes designed to withstand a punishing climate.
And their personal protection, the clothing, was equally critical. We talked about the bone needle, but let's consider the process. Scraping, curing, and treating hides to make them durable and pliable.
And the ultimate necessity was the adoption of layered clothing. Multiple layers, often trapping air for superior insulation, allowed for versatility. They could shed a layer during the brief summer hunting periods and then bundle up in the deepest winter. This also suggests the need for standardized clothing sizes and perhaps even early tailoring, demonstrating a collaborative effort in textile production.
And the footwear. You can't move without functional feet. Crafted shoes made from soft leather, often lined with fur, were essential to prevent debilitating frostbite during the long treks across ice and snow. The ability to travel was intrinsically linked to these clothing innovations.
The challenges of the Ice Age did something profound. They codified social structure. The ability to survive fundamentally rested not on individual prowess, but on complex, mandatory cooperation.
Right. Individual survival was statistically negligible. Group success in hunting required dozens of synchronized actions. Shared knowledge of migration routes and environmental hazards meant that mutual support was absolutely non-negotiable for long-term survival.
And this is where food sharing elevates from simple generosity to a critical survival mechanism. It was essentially life insurance. If a hunter was injured or if an elderly person held vital knowledge of plants or routes, their survival was ensured by the group sharing meat. This reinforced social bonds, fostered mutual dependence, and ensured the survival of non-contributors, the young, the sick, the injured, and the elderly.
So, by supporting those who couldn't contribute immediately, the group was investing in its own long-term viability. It was ensuring that accumulated knowledge and future generations survived. It created this incredible resilience within the community structure.
This also mandated flexible social structures. Leadership couldn't be rigid. It had to be situational. The person who was the most skilled tracker led the migration. The best toolmaker oversaw the resource processing. The most trusted hunter coordinated the kill. This optimized group effectiveness under rapidly changing high-stakes circumstances.
And moving from the social to the mental, this environmental pressure was the ultimate cognitive challenge. The Ice Age wasn't just cold, it forced the rapid evolution and expansion of the human brain.
The constant, unrelenting need to adapt to rapid environmental shifts drove the demand for sharper mental faculties. Just consider the planning required. Mapping a mammoth migration route that might take months, designing a composite tool that requires combining different materials, or navigating a massive, open, and featureless ice plain.
We're talking about a massive cognitive load. They weren't just thinking about today's dinner. They were using abstract thought to plan hunts weeks in advance, running complex mental maps of migration routes based on multi-generational memory, and understanding cause and effect in a volatile world.
The required cognitive skills were enormous. Advanced memory, complex planning, and problem solving. But brains are metabolically hungry. A larger, more complex brain needs serious fuel to function optimally.
And that's the fascinating link to diet, often called the expensive tissue hypothesis. The necessity of hunting large game resulted in a reliable, extremely high-calorie, nutrient-dense diet, specifically protein and the abundant fat from megafauna.
And that nutritional shift provided the essential steady supply of energy needed to fuel the growth and function of a larger, more complex human brain. It facilitated that intellectual leap. It wasn't just a bigger brain, but a brain that was better fed and better equipped for abstract thought, ready to handle the complex computations necessary for Ice Age survival.
And that advancement extended beyond pure survival mechanics. It stretched into the symbolic realm, which signifies a major cultural triumph.
The tangible evidence is stunning. The cave paintings found in sites like Lascaux and Altamira. These aren't simple doodles. They are sophisticated, often three-dimensional depictions of animals and hunting scenes found deep inside complex cave systems.
And they likely served a complex purpose beyond just decoration. What are the theories about what they were trying to communicate?
Well, they could have served symbolic or ritualistic purposes, perhaps related to hunting magic or ensuring the fertility of the herds. But crucially, they were also likely knowledge transmission tools, passing on vital information about animal behavior, weak points in the animal's anatomy, or specific migration cycles to younger generations. They were illustrated textbooks for survival.
And ritual itself shows social sophistication. The Ice Age burial sites demonstrate that early humans treated their dead with great care, often interring them with tools, red ochre, or ornaments.
This implies a belief system, caring for the dead, and possibly a belief in an afterlife. These shared belief systems were fundamental. They strengthened social cohesion and identity, providing psychological ballast during profoundly uncertain and dangerous times. A shared worldview helps hold a group together when you're facing existential threats.
And finally, the need to coordinate all these specialized tasks. Complex composite toolmaking, coordinated group hunting, long-distance migration planning, as well as the necessity to pass down complex, abstract knowledge across generations. It all dramatically accelerated the evolution of sophisticated language. You need specific words for specific tasks and abstract concepts.
Exactly. You can't coordinate a drive hunt across a frozen ravine using only grunts. You need nouns, verbs, and detailed spatial and temporal commands. The Ice Age was a linguistic pressure cooker.
We have to now address the other inhabitants of this frozen world. No discussion of Ice Age survival is complete without addressing Homo neanderthalensis. Your sources detail a relationship that was complex, involving coexistence, competition, and ultimately integration.
Neanderthals had been masters of the European and Western Asian cold for hundreds of thousands of years. They evolved specifically for that environment long before Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa, and they were superbly adapted. Shorter, stockier, more robust builds to retain heat efficiently, and distinct features like large nasal cavities, likely designed to warm frigid air before it reached their lungs.
So when Homo sapiens arrived in these territories, they encountered a species that was equally skilled, often using similar Mousterian tool technologies. The interaction wasn't simple.
No. The relationship was characterized by coexistence for tens of thousands of years, but also periods of intense competition for prime hunting territories, for caves, for scarce food resources. However, there was also cultural exchange. We find evidence of shared tool techniques and possibly even shared ornaments.
But here's where the story gets really compelling: the genetic legacy. The genetic evidence confirms they didn't just share hunting grounds, they interbred.
That's right. As Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa and into Neanderthal territory, the Middle East, Europe, Asia interbreeding occurred. Today, virtually all non-African modern humans carry a percentage of Neanderthal DNA, typically between 1 and 4%.
The insight here is just profound. The Neanderthal genome acted as a kind of ready-made toolkit for early Homo sapiens entering this harsh, hostile new climate.
Exactly. Rather than waiting millennia to evolve adaptations to cold, the incoming Homo sapiens acquired beneficial genes immediately. Those inherited Neanderthal genes are now linked to adaptations related to the immune system function, possibly helping fight local pathogens, and certainly traits that may have aided in cold tolerance, like fat metabolism or skin keratin structures. Adaptation wasn't just achieved through tool use, it was achieved through genetic incorporation.
Okay, so regarding the eventual disappearance of Neanderthals around 40,000 years ago, your sources present the two main impartial hypotheses. The first is outcompetition.
Right. This hypothesis argues that Homo sapiens possess superior organizational or technological advantages, more specialized projection-based weapons like the atlatl, more complex social networks for sharing knowledge over vast territories, and perhaps a more sophisticated language for coordination. These advantages allowed Homo sapiens to utilize resources slightly more efficiently, outcompeting Neanderthals for critical food sources during periods of deep stress.
And the second major theory involves absorption.
Yes. The idea here is that as Homo sapiens populations grew exponentially, the smaller, more geographically dispersed Neanderthal groups gradually interbred with them to the point where the distinct Neanderthal lineage was simply absorbed into the larger, expanding, modern human gene pool. So they weren't wiped out in a sudden war, they were integrated, leaving their enduring genetic legacy in all of us. This complex ending underscores the resilience of life and the ability of hominins to adapt both behaviorally and genetically.
And we really must emphasize that survival strategies were not monolithic. The Ice Age was experienced vastly differently across continents, and that showcases the incredible plasticity of human behavior.
Look at the northern extremes, Europe and northern Asia, as we've detailed. Survival was specialized, highly nomadic, intensely focused on megafauna hunting, reliance on those mammoth bone huts for shelter, and specialized fur clothing. The entire culture was dictated by the movement of giant animals.
Now, contrast that with the temperate zones, say, southern Europe. Here, early humans had access to caves and a somewhat warmer, or at least less perpetually frozen environment. Their diet was far more diverse, including smaller game, fish, and seasonal foraging of plants and nuts.
And this stable resource base and reliable shelter facilitated a rich cultural expression. The investment in time and energy required for creating those massive galleries of cave art found there suggests a degree of leisure and permanence that the northern nomadic groups simply didn't possess.
And then further south, in Africa, they faced severe aridity. There was no ice, but there were massive shifts in lake levels and rainfall. The critical adaptation here was exploiting stable coastal resources.
Yes. Exploiting the ocean fishing and the gathering of shellfish provided a consistent, reliable food source when inland water sources dried up. This move to maritime resources demonstrates profound behavioral flexibility, pivoting from land-based hunting to coastal foraging as required by climate change.
And finally, Southeast Asia. As sea levels fell, the Sunda Shelf was exposed, creating a massive archipelago. Survival there focused not on massive herds, but on managing dense tropical biodiversity. Small game hunting of pigs and birds, and the gathering of abundant roots and tubers from the rainforest. Their challenge was density and diversity, not cold and scarcity.
And this geographical variety and approach is so powerful. It confirms that the human species is the ultimate generalist, capable of developing totally different successful strategies depending on what ecological niche they inhabit.
In this incredible period of environmental stress, it didn't just end with a warming climate. It fundamentally shaped everything that came after. The enduring legacy of Ice Age survival is the foundation of our modern world.
Absolutely. The technological principles perfected during this desperate time, the precision engineering of composite tools, the utility of the bone needle, the physics of the atlatl, they became the foundational blueprint for future technological advancements, carrying straight into the Neolithic and Bronze Ages.
And the societal blueprint, the cooperation, the food sharing, the mutual support, the situational leadership, it laid the critical groundwork for complex societal structures. You can't build complex settled societies, tribes, or eventually nations without those fundamental concepts of shared risk and reward.
And critically, the knowledge gained was the precursor to the Neolithic Revolution. When the glaciers finally retreated and the climate stabilized, humans already possessed the survival literacy required. Deep knowledge of animal tracking and management, sophisticated tool-making, and the engineering skills for durable, permanent shelter.
So the Ice Age didn't just end, it equipped us. It gave humans the knowledge and the organizational structure they needed to successfully transition into settled life and cultivation, leading directly to agriculture. It was the ultimate boot camp for civilization. We've traveled from the colossal ice sheets of the last glacial maximum through the intricate design of a bone needle and into the flexible cooperative social structures that defined our ancestors. This is a social and cognitive triumph born from global environmental catastrophe.
Indeed. The Ice Age forced our brains to evolve for long-term planning, intense cooperation, and abstract thought just to survive that sustained environmental volatility. What stands out to you is that the Ice Age was not just a test of physical strength, but a crucible for the human mind.
It truly makes you appreciate that progress was forged under duress.
It does, and it raises an important question for us today. If that kind of extreme life or death environmental pressure was necessary for us to develop abstract thought, complex language, and highly resilient social structures, the very traits that define humanity, what does our current level of comfortable, cushioned stability mean for the future trajectory of human intellectual evolution? Are we still adapting and innovating, or does comfort remove the critical necessity for the truly transformative cognitive leaps we saw during the Ice Age? Something to consider as you navigate your own complex modern world.